Many people picture ancient Rome as marble forums, epic battles, and grand feasts. But that version of Rome? It's a fantasy. For most people, life in the Roman Empire was harsh, filthy, and brutally unforgiving. Let's find out why surviving even a single day in ancient Rome would be a lot harder than you think, and why most modern people wouldn't last until sunset. Let's talk about what happened when the wrong man got the right crown. Tiberius was never the first choice to lead Rome. Even Augustus, his stepfather and the empire's founder, looked for other options. But after a series of setbacks and shifting fortunes, the path cleared. And power landed in the hands of a bitter, paranoid man who seemed to resent the very world he was asked to rule. He didn't start off swinging an axe, though. Tiberius tried to play nice. He gave the Senate a chance to choose him, pretending he didn't want power. But Rome wasn't fooled, and neither was he. Once he had the throne, he clung to it, terrified, tense, and ready to bite anyone who got too close. Under Tiberius, Rome turned into a place where whispers could get you eliminated. His right-hand man, Sejanus, practically ran the show, building a private army within the city, crushing rivals, and turning the capital into a political minefield. People were taken from their homes in the middle of the night, sometimes just for a joke, a glance, or saying the wrong thing. Accused of treason, executed in public. It got so bad that senators were choosing to end their own lives rather than face trial. Families disappeared, prisons were packed, and the wildest part? It was all completely legal. Seriously. While Rome burned with fear, Tiberius fled to Capri, a sunny island that became something much darker. He left the city in Sejanus' hands and sank into a world of isolation, paranoia, and rumored perversions. Writers of the time, and later historians, describe Capri as a palace of horrors. Tiberius surrounded himself with astrologers, young boys, and wine. Some reports even claimed he mistreated children and had people thrown from cliffs into the sea for entertainment. Whether every detail was true or not, the image stuck. Rome's emperor was a ghost haunting a paradise turned prison. Meanwhile, Sejanus launched a quiet genocide. Anyone connected to Germanicus, the golden boy Tiberius had exiled and possibly poisoned, was hunted. His wife Agrippina was starved till her last breath. Her sons were harmed, exiled, or eliminated. Only one child of Germanicus remained, a quiet boy named Caligula, forced to watch as his entire family was destroyed. And all this time, Tiberius said nothing, did nothing. It was as if he'd traded his conscience for control. Then, suddenly, the monster turned on his monster. In a shocking move, Tiberius had Sejanus arrested, his body strangled, dragged through the streets, and thrown into the river. The man who had ruled from the shadows was gone, but the damage was done. Tiberius never returned to Rome. He passed away on Capri, alone and despised, leaving the empire to Caligula, the deeply traumatized son of a family destroyed by politics and power. When news of Tiberius's death spread, Rome cheered. They thought the nightmare had ended. What they didn't know, it was just getting started. Enter Caligula. If Tiberius was cold and calculating, Caligula was pure chaos. Not just eccentric, unhinged. According to ancient sources, he once walked into a bull sacrifice and, instead of taking the animal's life, he turned and smashed the priest's head in with a mallet. Why? He thought it was funny. He also believed he was a literal god, built a temple for himself, and reportedly tried to make his horse a senator. But it gets worse. When there weren't enough slaves for an animal fight in the arena, Caligula allegedly just picked a section of the crowd and had them fed to the beasts instead. That's right. You could be enjoying a show 1 minute, and on the lion's lunch menu the next. His end? Poetic justice. The guards had enough of his madness and turned on him, striking him down not once or twice, but 30 times. That's not an elimination, that's a statement. And this wasn't rare. Roman emperors were falling left and right. In 193 AD alone, 5 emperors were appointed, and none of them lasted. In 238 AD, 6 came to power, only to be swiftly replaced. Between 238 and 285 AD, a staggering 25 emperors rose and fell, most meeting violent or sudden ends. Hard to imagine living in ancient Rome, right? Today, we complain about politics or bad news. But back then, one wrong word could erase your entire family. No rights, no privacy, no safety net, just power, fear, and survival. Loyalty didn't guarantee protection, and justice was optional. Most of us wouldn't make it through the day. But that's just scratching the surface. Sure, the Romans gave us roads, aqueducts, and organized government, but they also held public elimination as entertainment, brushed their teeth with urine, and turned punishment into performance. Rome's origin myth? It begins with the so-called rape of the Sabine women, a mass abduction disguised as a celebration. Romulus and his followers, short on women, invited neighboring tribes to a festival. While the men were distracted, the women were taken and forced into marriage. Whether or not every detail is clear, one thing's certain: the empire was built on force from day one. In Rome, violence wasn't a breakdown in the system. It was the foundation. And you know what? Forget Netflix. The Romans had live elimination matches. Their idea of fun was watching humans and animals get ripped to shreds in public arenas while eating snacks. Gladiator fights were the Super Bowl of the empire, but with a 50-50 chance of death. Tens of thousands packed into the Colosseum to watch armored fighters battle for survival and a bit of applause. Most of these fighters weren't volunteers. They were enslaved people or prisoners forced into the arena. If they refused to fight, their life would be over anyway. Even more insane, animals were part of the fights too. They imported lions, elephants, bears, and tigers just to throw them into death pits with humans or each other. If you were an exotic animal in ancient Rome, your fate was likely sealed the moment you arrived. And let's talk about chariot races. Fast, dangerous, deadly. The Circus Maximus was the deadliest NASCAR track of its time. Charioteers were basically daredevils with no safety gear, thrown into high-speed races with sharp turns that could, and often did, end in brutal crashes. The crowd loved it. The more limbs lost, the better the race. Now, Rome was a well-oiled machine, but it ran on human suffering. Around 1/3 of Italy's population were slaves. That's not a typo. Every third person was considered property. These people weren't just household maids. They were miners, builders, cooks, cleaners, farmhands, nannies, and of course, gladiators. If a slave messed up, dropped a dish, said the wrong thing, or just looked tired, beatings were common. But here's where it gets truly horrific. If one slave took the life of a master, every single slave in the household was done, even if they had nothing to do with it. One documented case had 400 slaves eliminated for the actions of one. That's not justice. That's legalized genocide. Gladiator slaves had it the worst. Forced to train like soldiers, then sent into the arena to fight for their lives. Not by choice, but for the amusement of the crowd. Their suffering was celebrated. And while Rome could be barbaric in the arena, it prided itself on innovation elsewhere. Aqueducts, public baths, and toilets. Sounds impressive, right? At first glance, sure. But those public latrines, far from comfortable. Picture a long stone bench with holes, no dividers, and everyone sitting side by side. Privacy wasn't part of the design. And here's the part no one tells you. For hygiene, they used communal sponges on sticks, dipped in vinegar. One sponge, shared by everyone. Suddenly, Roman innovation feels a lot less glamorous. As for those impressive sewage systems, they weren't even built to carry away human waste. They were mainly designed to handle rainwater. So in reality, waste still piled up, overflowed into the streets, and turned the city into a breeding ground for disease. Dysentery, typhoid, parasites, all part of daily life. The smell alone, probably unbearable. They exploded too. That's not a joke. Methane gas built up in the sewer system and could cause spontaneous latrine explosions, injuring or taking a person's life mid-poop. And just when you think it couldn't get any worse, it does. Romans used urine as detergent. Fullers, the laundry workers of the time, collected human pee to soak clothes in, since the ammonia helped lift stains. It was in such high demand that the emperor actually taxed it. And it didn't stop at laundry. Some Romans used urine as toothpaste, believing it whitened their teeth. Need fertilizer? Human waste was poured directly onto fruit trees, with the hope it would nourish the soil, and not poison the harvest. This was a civilization obsessed with power, spectacle, and control, and it rarely cared who got crushed along the way. Behind every polished column stood a pile of bones. Behind every golden statue, a slave holding it up. And beneath the ruins that tourists admire today lies something far less glamorous, a world built on fear, filth, and forced labor. You've probably heard the phrase, "When in Rome, do as the Romans do." Sounds light-hearted, right? Like eating pasta or wearing sandals. But in ancient Rome, doing as the Romans do was no casual suggestion. It was a serious, sometimes life or death, expectation. Let's break down what that really meant. First, worship their gods, or else. Before Christianity took hold, Rome had a massive pantheon of gods, and honoring them wasn't optional. Citizens were expected to make offerings, attend rituals, and publicly respect the gods. Refuse. Congratulations, you are now an outsider, a potential threat, maybe even a traitor. Christians who refused to sacrifice to Roman gods were tortured, fed to animals, or burned alive. So, yeah, doing as the Romans do sometimes meant abandoning your beliefs or dying for them. Then, join the arena party. Have you ever seen someone cheer while another man gets mauled by a lion? Ancient Romans did, and they called it entertainment. Gladiator fights, public executions, animal slaughter. These were the mainstream events. If you sat in the Colosseum and didn't cheer, that made you suspicious, different, maybe even a sympathizer to the criminal or the slave being torn apart. That kind of silence could get you investigated, maybe arrested, definitely watched. So yes, if you were in Rome, you'd better cheer for blood. After that, you gotta respect the emperor like a god, or meet the sword. Disagreeing with the emperor in Rome wasn't a political statement. It could mean the end of your life. Roman emperors were often seen as divine, or at least untouchable. Say the wrong thing about the emperor, and you could be crucified, stabbed 30 times in your own palace, shout out Caligula, or have your whole family erased. People literally bowed and worshipped emperors. If you didn't, you just told the most powerful man on earth you think he's a joke. Want to guess how that ended? And guess what? Dress, speak, and act right, or be degraded. Rome had a strict social hierarchy. Emperors, senators, patricians, plebs, slaves. Where you stood in that ladder dictated everything. How you dressed, who you talked to, even how you walked. If a foreigner dressed wrong or acted too freely, they could be mocked, rejected, even enslaved. Seriously, some travelers got enslaved just for being poor and in the wrong place at the wrong time. So, when in Rome, yeah, you better copy that walk, that talk, and that toga drape if you wanted to walk out alive. Romans loved fermented fish sauce, called garum, pickled intestines, and wine diluted with salt water or resin. Refused to eat it. That was disrespectful. Worse, it could be suspicious. And let's say you tried to bring your own food, like bread or salted meat. Bad move. In certain areas, this was seen as unpatriotic or foreign, another way to mark yourself as not one of us. And in Rome, being not one of us often meant you were a problem needing removal. Also, Romans were obsessed with their bathhouses, but they weren't exactly clean. These public pools were steamy pits of skin, sweat, disease, and sometimes sewage. But if you refused to go in, people would whisper. Was it because you thought you were better than them? Were you hiding something? Were you diseased? Being too clean could also make you a target. It made you look like a stuck-up foreigner. Again, danger. Fast forward to modern times, and we've sanitized this phrase. We say, when in Rome, when trying sushi for the first time, or buying a cheesy souvenir. But let's be real, that idea of blending in is still powerful. And it's still dangerous. People today still get hurt, or worse, for being different, for not following the crowd, for not respecting local customs. From travelers caught in conservative regimes to immigrants judged for not adopting a new culture instantly. This phrase still echoes with warning. And if you ever found yourself in actual ancient Rome, you'd better believe you'd follow that rule to the letter, or end up as lion food. Want to live? Then walk like them, talk like them, eat like them, and cheer when a man's guts hit the floor. That's what "when in Rome" really meant. The laws were brutal, and the penalties often felt more like public warnings than justice, harsh, graphic, and designed to terrify. But while fear ruled inside the empire, danger was building at the borders. The Romans called them barbarians, a catch-all term for any group that wasn't Roman, but these so-called outsiders were becoming a very real threat. Goths, Vandals, Huns, Franks, and others pushed into Roman lands, attacking towns, overrunning fortresses, and unraveling centuries of imperial control. These invasions weren't isolated. Entire populations were on the move, many fleeing the unstoppable advance of the Huns across Central Asia. Tribes crossed rivers, mountains, and imperial boundaries, looking for land, security, or power. Some came as enemies, others as refugees, but almost all of them arrived armed and desperate. Rome's once mighty military was spread too thin to respond effectively. Long campaigns, shrinking recruitment, and poor morale left garrisons weak. To fill the ranks, commanders turned to foreign soldiers, often the same groups threatening the empire. That created loyalty problems, and soon generals were turning against one another, declaring themselves emperors or cutting backroom deals to protect their own interests. The economy wasn't faring any better. Trade broke down. Farmlands were abandoned, cities shrank. Taxes became unbearable, especially for the poor, while the wealthy insulated themselves from the chaos. Money lost its value, and in some places, people returned to barter just to survive. Inside Rome, leadership had become a deadly game. Emperors came and went, most forced out by assassination or rebellion. Civil wars drained resources, trust in the government collapsed. By the time 476 AD arrived and the last Western emperor was removed, the fall felt less like a shock and more like a final breath. No fireworks, no epic showdown, just decades of decline catching up all at once. Rome didn't fall off a cliff. It crumbled in slow motion, and the world watched it happen. And yet, even as the empire collapsed, Rome left behind one of the most influential legacies in human history. Its roads stretched across continents, over 250,000 miles of them. They weren't just for marching legions. They were the veins of empire, moving goods, people, and ideas. Some of those roads still exist today, buried under modern highways. Roman law influenced legal systems across Europe and beyond. Concepts like innocent until proven guilty, contracts, and citizen rights, they didn't always work in practice, especially not for slaves or women. But the framework was there. Even the United States founding fathers studied Roman governance while drafting their own system, just with fewer emperors and more elections. Latin, Rome's language, became the foundation of French, Spanish, Italian, Portuguese, and Romanian. The Roman alphabet is used by over 70% of the world today, and Roman architecture, arches, domes, concrete, shaped the way cities were built for centuries. Walk through Washington, D.C., Paris, or London, and you'll see Roman echoes everywhere.